I'm Rob Watts in Berlin, and today we're asking if Europe is deindustrializing. European factories have been shutting down furnaces and keeping production to a minimum. Why? Because of the soaring cost of energy. The war in Ukraine has driven up the prices of oil and gas, and energy-intensive industries are the first to feel the pinch. With no end in sight for Europe's power problems, could a phase-out of factories be on the cards?
Belgium is one of the few Eurozone countries that has not suffered a recession. But the country's latest bankruptcy figures show the debt crisis is striking at the very heart of Europe.
You don't have any money anymore. People try to survive. It will be better next month, it will be better in 3 months. But now it's almost 2 or 3 years that the crisis is busy. So people don't have any reserve, they don't have any money, so they are collapsing.
The Statistics Office says more than 1,900 businesses went bust last month in a year that has been the worst Belgium has ever experienced.
We've had a series of alarming figures, haven't we? France plunging in economic activity by 27% in April. Just hearing, in fact, from the French Finance Minister, Bruno Le Maire, who's been speaking on French radio, saying he expects the French economy to shrink by 11% this year.
Days after credit rating agency Fitch downgraded France's debt worthiness from AA to AA negative, its finance minister has promised to overhaul the economy. Usually, rating agencies assign a level to measure the debt worthiness of a country or company. A downgrade in a country's debt suggests some economic trouble.
Protests in France last year over pension reform were a political blow for President Macron. Still worse, savings from it were not enough to keep the fiscal deficit under control.
A sharp uptick in the number of German firms beginning insolvency proceedings is raising eyebrows in Europe's largest economy. Some 762 firms declared bankruptcy in September. That's a 34% increase from the same period last year. And the upward trend is set to continue this month and the next. That's according to the Halle Institute for Economic Research. According to their new report, by November, up to 40% more companies could be beginning insolvency proceedings compared to the same period last year.
Volkswagen says it is going to terminate a job security agreement that has been in place with workers for the last 20 years. The German car maker is also considering closing car plants in Germany.
In December, the number of corporate insolvencies in Germany shot up by 18%. This is likely the beginning of the long-feared wave of bankruptcies.
Farmers blocking roads, trains at a standstill, the worst performing major economy in the world last year. Not to mention a €17 billion hole in its budget. Germany, once the beacon of European fiscal stability, is struggling.
It's a number of factors. Some of them are homemade, like high taxes, more and more bureaucracy, and all these factors are a bit much now.
Volkswagen could close factories in Germany for the first time in its history, and that's a sign of just how much pressure Europe's top car maker faces from new Asian rivals.
downturn in Eurozone factory activity deepened in April. The closely watched Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell to 45.7 in April from 46.1 in March. It was the 22nd month in a row below the key 50 mark, separating growth from contraction. The sector endured falling demand despite factories cutting prices, but the decline was inconsistent across the bloc. The situation got worse in France and Italy, but the sector moved closer to expanding in powerhouse Germany.
What the Victorians left behind, many of us still call home, but the architecture of that very different era could be hiding behind its doors the risk of Britain slipping back to a time of two nations, that Victorian age gap between mainstream society and an impoverished underclass. Not some tiny minority either, but more than 13 million people.
Now, Britain's second biggest city has effectively declared itself bankrupt this week after revealing an £87 million deficit for the financial year. Birmingham City Council has paused all essential services, and its leaders say tough decisions will have to be taken in the days ahead.
I mean, the nature of poverty has changed. So you talked about the late 70s, early 80s. The predictor of whether you were going to be poor in this country then was if you were old or if you were unemployed. Now, a majority of poor households do contain at least one worker because of the way that wages at the lower end, it's also been the case in the US, have fallen down relative to others. And I think it's striking, you know, we say we're a rich country, we're a G7 country, but the poorest fifth of the population are now much poorer here than most of the poorest countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So there is a big chunk of the population for whom that is not the case, that they do not live in a rich country. They actually would be better off, even as a poor household, they would be better off in quite poor countries in the European Union. So that's a growing issue which predates Brexit.
Birmingham City Council is in fact the largest local authority in the whole of Europe. The fact that it has declared itself bankrupt, of course, in effect bankrupt, is very worrying news.
The impact of lockdowns during the pandemic, according to the Centre for Social Justice, which produced the report, is that life is going backwards for many, with staggeringly high numbers experiencing mental health conditions.
The report paints a picture of lives marred by family fragility, stagnant wages, poor housing, chronic ill health and crime. The most disadvantaged in Britain are no better off than they were 15 years ago at the time of the financial crash. There's evidence that moving from welfare into work just isn't worth it for many people. And the report's authors say there is no sign that help is on the way.
They also say our political culture is mired in a sense of pessimism and decline, and that with a general election on the horizon, the country desperately needs answers on how to close that gap between the rich and poor.